So if you have been using Photoshop for a while, you might have already seen selection tools. But if you haven't, this is the right time to understand selection tools. It's one of those most necessary and most useful features in Photoshop when you're either working on photo editing, or you're working on drawing, or you want to be creating some new graphic designs. So for all of that, you need to understand the very basic of something called the selection tools. Now, there is a lot of selection variations that you can do in Photoshop. In fact, there's an entire tab that's dedicated to it. Well, now in this video, I'm going to be talking about these selection tools and touching upon how you can play around with a different variation of doing selections. So let's get started. Before we get into using these tools, let's quickly understand the couple of shortcuts that we might need again and again. Now, the thing in Photoshop is that you need to understand shortcuts when you're working with selections. Even before I explain what the selection styles are, you need to understand the shortcuts that are available. So if you're selecting something, you can directly select it and it will create a new selection every time. But if you add or hold the shift button, that will add to this selection itself. So this way I can add multiple selections just like that. The inverse is possible by holding Alt or Option on your keyboard, and then you can reduce or remove from selections. The last one is mixing both of them together, which is Shift and Alt or Option. That makes it intersect. So when you're creating a new selection with an intersection, it will end up selecting the area which was present initially and being added now as well. So this is the area that gets selected. Now these shortcuts are the ones that you can see over here. You can replace, you can just click on one of these buttons and end up not pressing any button and making a selection just like that. Well, now that you've understood these shortcuts, let's understand the most basic selections that you can do, which are shape-based selections, which is rectangle and circle. Now the kind of selection that I was making was possible because of the rectangular marquee tool. This creates a rectangular selection, very good for cropping if you want to crop something. You can even fix the style or basically the ratio or size that you might want to create a selection for. Then you can also do this in an elliptical marquee tool. Now both of these are the most basic ones that come in very handy when you're creating a very simple structure in your image. Well, sometimes using these shapes might not be sufficient. You might want a slightly different or a slightly complicated shape. That is where you use the lasso tools. Now, moving on. The next selection that I want to talk to you about is the lasso tool. Now, lasso tool works very simply. Basically, when you drag by clicking on the image, it will end up creating a selection just on that area. Simple, isn't it? The next one is a polygonal lasso tool, which works also very similarly. But instead of creating simple drag lines from one place to another, I can end up clicking at one point and creating a simple polygon or a single line that can be extended from one point to another to increase or decrease what you want to select. And of course, when you're moving towards the end, a small circle on the bar itself will tell you that the selection is getting a closed selection. So that way you know that the selection is getting done. Now the next one is the magnetic lasso tool. Now this also works very similar to the lasso tool itself or the polygonal lasso tool itself, but it takes into account the contrast in the image itself. So if I end up dragging it over here, you can see that it sticks to the closest contrasting area. That way you can end up creating a new selection very simply by just dragging your mouse close to the subject that you'd want to select. If there is enough contrast, you will be able to create a good selection. So let's say we do this over here. And there we go. We have made a selection. Now, one place where these or any of these tools do not work well is probably somewhere near like this, where there is a lot of definition that Photoshop cannot distinguish between, like fur or hair. And for that reason, we'll see the new type of selections that you can do. Well, that last aspect of lasso tool, which is the magnetic one, is not where it stops. It is great, but there is something way better than that. These are the object selection tools. Let's see them. The first one that we're going to talk about is the quick selection tool. Now, if you're using the paid version of Photoshop, you might be able to do with the object selection tool, but if you're not, let me quickly tell you about the quick selection tool. Now, this works by taking very similar the contrast of the picture or of the image with its nearby pixels, and that way I can end up selecting similar looking regions by just dragging around the area. You can choose to add or subtract directly by clicking on this one of these buttons over here, or by holding Shift or Alt if you have the basic one selected. The next one is the magic wand tool. Now this works very similar to the quick selection tool, but when you're selecting a lot of area with quick selection tool, you might have to just drag one after the other. The magic wand tool lets you avoid that. When you do this, it will end up selecting everything around it in a single click. You can increase the tolerance if you think that there is similarity in the pixels itself. So if I click over here now, you'll see a larger area is being selected because the tolerance is higher. I can also enable or disable contiguous so that it can select similar areas but which are not connected to each other. For instance, the hands over here. So if I select this, you'll be able to see that a larger area has been selected which is not contiguous. Of course, you can see that there is problem with high tolerance over here, and that is something that we will see again and again. But what if you'd want to go a step higher in doing these selections? Let me give you one bonus tip about how you can do selections using the selection tab. Now, to avoid this, there is something called the color selection. How do we do that? The color selection can be done by going to select and choosing color range. With this, you'll be able to set a color range that you want in your selection. Now, what I have over here is an eyedropper tool with which I can choose or pick a color. And basis that color, you'll be able to see a nice mask right over here. Now, there is a consistent problem that will happen because when you're playing this with the human skin or human elements, you will end up facing a lot of problems because more or less the human skin has a red color that is available in a lot of different colors as well. So you can see that this skin tone and white and red tone is also something that can be seen in the shirt over here. So that is why you'll not be able to make a good sort of selections with the color selection tool. Best option for this would be to go for selections that do not have regular sort of colors. For instance, this image. Now over here, I'd be able to select the blue ones very easily using the color selection tool. So if I have the color range and now I choose the blue balls over here and add more details over here, you'll be able to see that this color selection is working way better than compared to the previous one. So this way I have been able to select all of these blue balls. There is some part of blue over here in the camera as well that I can remove by using one of the lasso tools. So I can choose a simple lasso tool, hold Alt or Option and then select around this area to deselect that part of the image. Now, if you have the benefit of using the paid version of Photoshop, you will be able to use the object selection tool very easily. This allows you to select a lot of elements from the image very simply just by hovering over the image itself. So if I can bring it over here, you can see that this ends up making a nice selection. Of course, this is not as easy in this image because even AI would fail sometimes, won't it? But in a case like this, you'll be able to make nice selections quick and easy. So I can choose to select the sky, the person, the girl over here, or even the bike. If I want to see all of these different options at once, I can press and hold N on the keyboard. So I can see what are the different subjects which are available that the tool can figure out and select for me. Now, if I choose and click on any one of these objects, it will end up creating a very simple selection. You might need to refine this for instances like this, where the jacket has not been selected properly, but something is better than nothing, isn't it? By doing this, I will save a lot of time in making simple selections. I can do the same thing with the bike over here as well, and that presents a slightly better selection compared to the other one that we just did, because the contrast over here is very well defined so that Photoshop can understand the process or the objects over here. Well, I hope you were able to understand all of these and will be able to apply these in your upcoming projects. If you like this video, make sure that you like it on YouTube as well. Share this with somebody who you think would be benefited from it, and subscribe to Design Up for more videos like this.